I feel like my identity then was shaped predominantly by things that I felt I wasn't. Having got to this stage, I feel like I'm now defining self by how I feel about now. It's an introspective thing rather than looking outwards.
For me, what I'm noticing is my identity is so closely tied largely to my professional role, and I can see now how unsatisfying that is, to be perfectly honest.
Welcome to Midlife Unfiltered, a podcast about unapologetically embracing the season of me as we live the lives we want in midlife and beyond. I'm Anita McLachlan.
I'm Webb. We're here to make some noise, say hell no to outdated stereotypes, and hell yes to living life on our terms.
Putting on.
Thank God for you, Kat. We had a bit of a tech hitch, but as always, we get through, we get by. So thanks, Kat. Great to have you here.
My pleasure.
Adding value already before you even say anything.
Press the button. I'm all about the buttons.
Love that about you, girl. Kat and Alex, welcome back to the potty. How are you both?
Fabulous.
She's lying. Do you know why she's lying? Because we had a very quick conversation beforehand and we both looked at each other and went, the vibe is really weird today. The vibe is weird.
The energetic daily, like it's not the vibe between us.
No.
The world.
The day.
Today.
Yeah. So let's see what happens. But we are really excited. Thank you so much for coming back. We had you in season 1 and you were so popular that we've got you back for another round in season 2. But no, thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Because
Erica.
we are indeed unfiltered.
We're definitely unfiltered.
You're our kind of gals. No, but seriously, thank you so much because your time is precious and we do appreciate you and are very grateful. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And today we're talking about something big because, a lot of things are big in midlife. Identity. It's huge. And I don't know how far through the conversation we're going to get, but I'm really excited for how it's going to unfold, really. Because in midlife, the disruption, and that's what we're calling season 2, the disruption, is massive, isn't it, Erica? It can sideswipe you.
Oh, yes. It sure can. Yeah. I think this is going to be a really good conversation. And, our conversation in season 1, as you said, was so well received. And I think it was for the vulnerability and the honesty that was shared. And so I think this topic is going to lend itself beautifully to that again.
Yeah, absolutely. So just as we had some hard-hitting questions in the first episode, why don't we start fairly high? And maybe with you, Alex. I think that's a hot seat, isn't it, Kat? You were in the hot seat last time. Yeah. So sit back and relax. Let the vibe subside.
Brace for impact.
Now, you and I are the same age, we discovered. We're 57ers. And well and truly in the disruption now, swimming in the disruption.
Yes.
How have you found your identity shift in midlife? And has it? I'm assuming that it has.
Yes. So I don't think identity is ever a static thing.
No.
It's probably the first thing. And if I think about what I was like or how I perceived of myself in the earlier years, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, I feel like my identity then was shaped predominantly by things that I felt I wasn't.
Oh.
And now, having come to the prime of one's life, 60s and new 30 people.
Love that.
Yes.
Bring it on.
God, I hope so.
Yes, that's right. Having got to this stage, I feel like I'm now defining self by how I feel about now. It's an introspective thing rather than looking outwards and going, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that, and imagining that somehow something would fall out of that felt right. And now I've realised that, well, that was all bollocks. And that actually the reflective part of this time of my life I'm really enjoying. I mean, it does occasionally bring up some hideous stuff and I go, was I really like that? you know, and you kind of work your way through things, and then you figure out how you want it to be from this point forward. And the lovely thing about that at this time in my life is that I couldn't give a tinker's cuss if that suits anyone or not. Like, it's just fully, that's what's going to happen. So there's no stress about that in a way.
How delightful.
I love that. So it's authentically you. Like it's a time, and I love
warts and all, darling. Sure.
But what a gift. You know, as you say, we go through so much of our lives where that authenticity doesn't always come through, or we don't always feel it. So at this time in midlife, I 1000% agree with you. I feel I'm stepping into my own skin more and more now in this phase of life.
I have often thought also, though, that part of it is that when you're younger, you're so much more susceptible to the pressures of what other people think.
Yes.
And the pressures that society, you're not smart enough, thin enough, fat enough, you're not in the right car, you're not with the right bloke, you're not with the right partner, you don't have the right dog, you're not in the right suburb. What school did you go to? It's like all this judgment stuff, just layer upon layer upon layer. So, of course, is it any wonder that we get to the, midlife and go, oh, for fuck's sake. Sorry. Oh, bugger. There's an edit point there, Erica.
No,
we can swear on this podcast.
We leave them in.
Well, you do. You just you run out of
fucks to give.
Fucks to give.
Yeah. There ain't none left.
Totally. You've got it, Kat. That's it.
And we talked about this in the previous episode where you said, is that real? Is that true? And we both went, yeah, it's absolutely true. Because you're a little bit, you're trying to catch up to us in that regard.
I'm running really fast and I'll never quite catch up.
So in your younger, you're younger than us. How have you experienced that? Have you noticed any shifts?
Yeah. So I'm 49, so I'm not quite at that. In fact, I've started to say I'll be 50 next year, and I'm like, stop that.
Why?
Like, pull it back. Like, why am I trying to add another year to my age? I've literally only just turned 49. For me, what I'm noticing is my identity is so closely tied largely to my professional role, sometimes to my parenting role, not as much though. Like I've actually never identified as a mother.
I'm sure your boys would love to hear that.
I think they're aware. I like my boys. I love my boys. No, I'm not even going to say that I enjoy being their mum, but like I've never identified as a mother. But I have identified with my job title or my business role, and I can see now how unsatisfying that is, to be perfectly honest. And so I'm like, okay, well, who am I if I'm not if I'm not a business owner, if I'm not a facilitator, if I'm not Cat Matson the brand, who am I? And that's opening up some really daunting is the wrong word, unfamiliar questions. Like there is a real sense of
a bit confronting at times.
Yeah, a bit confronting because I don't have much else. You know, like I don't have hobbies. I don't have.
No, it's not true. It's not true. You've got loads.
Oh no, and I know that I do, but it's more. So much of my identity is about what I do.
It's an expression.
It's
not
an expression,
who you are.
Yeah.
Not necessarily who I am. I can see the red threads of who I am, and I'm kind of sitting in this place of, oh, really? I wonder who Cat is. I wonder if it's Cat or whether it's Catherine. Like whether I go back. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a really interesting. So much of who I currently am in the world is a construct for business purposes or for brand purposes or for surviving. So I was like, oh, well, if I could choose all over again, who would I be?
I think what you've brought up is a really essential part of what is identity, because I think we do often confuse our roles with the essence of who we are. And, we've had the tough questions answered about 90-year-old you and what are they saying about you. It's that whole, what they're going to say at your wake or at your funeral. They're not going to say, she was a great brand. They might.
If it happened, if my wake was tomorrow, they might. But I'm hoping that when my wake is when I'm 99 and a half, they kind of go, wow, she was a pretty cool broad.
Yeah.
But
Well,
it won't be about
it won't
a
be
brand,
about
a
that.
brand. Yeah.
Yeah. So it'll be stuff like Kat was fucking awesome. She was very generous. She was loving. She had a wicked sense of humour, and she loved a martini like nobody else on this planet.
Martini lady.
Yeah.
For breakfast.
So going back to how you answered that question about future you, it's interesting, isn't it?
It
How
is.
we can, I don't know if it's a confusion thing or if it's an evolution. I think you evolve into appreciating that your identity is not all about, well, if at all, what you do.
Part of my reflection has been as my boys start to prepare to leave home, and so my parenting role shifts, and as my desires for my business role to shift, there is that conscious realization of, oh, all of this stuff that I've been striving for, all of this stuff that I've been waiting for is actually about to happen. And so when all of that falls away, what's left? What's the piece, or what are the pieces? And so, I feel like there's more bandwidth and more emotional space to choose how I show up now and who I am.
It is definitely a shedding, and rebuilding. I absolutely believe that too. Yeah. Alex, I can see.
You brought up the issue of Kat or Catherine, and that for me prompts a bit of a reflection on alter egos. Mm-hmm. So I have an alter ego for moments where I have to work a room.
Oh.
And she's called Triandra.
That's an interesting name.
Yeah, she's named. Yeah, okay. And she's Triandra because she's a cross between my great aunt Tricia, it's the tree, and my mother Sandra.
Wow,
Triandra.
That's very, very cool.
Yeah, so I've taken attributes of both of those women when I have to do something that is not, it's not that it's out of my comfort zone, but you've got to be in a mode, so it's when you have to go and greet everyone in a room, or you need to find out who everyone is and you've got to walk up to people. I get very fabulous. Darling, how are you?
You do. I've seen you do that.
Yes, I know. And it's just a little bit over the top, and the over the topness makes people kind of sit back. And then they don't ask you personal questions. So it's absolutely a strategy on my part. But I'm throwing that in there because I think that sometimes those personas can, they can serve a purpose, and sometimes they can be things that become identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm getting a vision of shading in with a pencil of some sort to go, well, that's my values are X, Y, Z, and they're there. And then in between the spaces, I might shade a bit of
like a Venn
diagram. Other stuff. Yeah.
Venn diagram of all the identities.
Yeah, or something, spaces in between, the spaces in between. And you bring up another point that I was hoping we'd talk about, which is role models in all of this. So, you talked about your mum and your great aunt. That's brilliant. And I think when we are shedding some of our previous perceptions of who we are or who we thought we were in this stage of life, and coming back to who we are somehow with deep reflection, and there's, that's not easy, creating the space and time to ask those questions of ourselves and to dig deep. But I reckon there's nothing like a good old-fashioned role model to go, yeah. It just helps you, it makes it more tangible in a way, doesn't it too? And you go, yeah, I want to be like that in some ways, like that person, because X, Y, Z. So I wonder if you have any role models, do you feel that about role models, or could there be some role models out there that we could look for to help us with etching our new identity?
It's, as you ask that, I can think of a whole host of women who I do think of in that way. And then I also think, but I'm really done with looking at how everybody else has done it and trying to step into that. I'm actually wanting to go, no. What do I want? What's who's me? Because I've known this about myself for years. I'm a shapeshifter. I I will walk into a room without Triandra, but I'll walk into a room and I'll ask, who am I? Who are all these others? What do I do in a place like this with people like them? And I will adjust. I will morph, and depending on my outcome for that room, I will match the energy of the biggest person in the room, or I'll match the person's, I'll do that. And I can see throughout the course of my life that is where a big source of my identity has come from. I'm multi-personalities because I've taken on all of these pieces, these composite. I'm a composite. So now I'm actually sitting here going, no, who am I?
But when you distill all that down, that's I think that's, again, the role model thing, I guess, in my mind wasn't so much about what they do. It's more how they do it, which I think the how bit reflects their values and the essence of who they are. Not that they are a CEO of a blah, blah company, in top 10. No, I mean, that doesn't yank my chain at all. But if I could see that there's strength in adversity, or, generosity, or something like that in the way that they go about what they do, I guess that's more meaningful for me.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that. And so what I think I'm looking for now then is those expressions, less than, and maybe for me it's a semantic reframe of the word role model, rather than looking at individuals and going, oh, that's role model, instead going, what is it that I like about that person?
Yeah,
What
totally.
do I pull from that person and add to my composite?
Yeah. Why have one person when you can have attributes of 20?
Or 50.
Or 50.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Wow, that's sounding mighty complex.
Too
much
have we
overload.
Met? Have we met?
Erica, have you got any thoughts on anything like, I know you're big on the values piece, so do you want to go there for a bit with values? Because I know that's something you do with the work that you do a fair bit.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm sort of like just lapping up what you're saying and trying to connect some dots. I have been past a kind of a fairly interesting opportunity to kind of like write my identity again in midlife. Before we hit record, I just sort of filled the girls in on some of my life updates, which included finding out that I am a donor-conceived person. And so my paternity is in question. I actually don't know who my dad is, or my biological father. And so this has created like quite a big question, right, around who am I? And I don't know if I would have told you at the beginning, like, a few months ago before I knew, that my identity was kind of tied into who my parents were. But when that was taken away, I was like, shit, maybe it was. Like, it's what kind of created this whole thing. And so I have been questioning this idea of identity a lot in recent times, because a lot of people have said to me, but at your essence, you're still you. And I'm like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
I appreciate that other people can sort of see something. And I think this is kind of where I wanted to go with the values thing. I think sometimes our identity is more evident to the people outside of us than it is to us, because everybody kind of has a sort of essence, don't you reckon? Like, you know what you feel like when you're with them. You know what you feel like when you've been able to be in their company. And I kind of think that is a bigger part of identity than we give credit to. Because when you sit down with someone, usually the first thing you ask if you meet someone for the first time is like, what do you do for a living?
Yeah.
And we confuse that with who are you? Because you might not even be interested in what you do for a living, right? You might have just landed there by sheer coincidence. I know that's not true for any of us here, but it may well be true for a lot of people. I mean, I sort of fell into some of my career, but
We all do a bit of falling, I think.
Yeah, I think we all do a bit of, it's like those balls that, it's kind of like, where will you land? You're not really sure.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
it ends up forming such a big part of your identity. And I think that when you kind of look at a values exercise, I guess, for thinking about what is important to me, I think that does point far more to who you are as an identity than what you do, who you spend time with, although I think that reflects your values often anyway, but certainly reflects far more than what you do for a living. But most people don't know what their values are. They know what they value, You know, they know that they value family. They know that they value, having money in the bank. They know that they value some things, but they don't know what their personal values are. And that can be, I think, a very enlightening practice, because here's the kicker with values. Often we have a set of values that we don't live. And so I think that for me is where identity comes in. It's like, oh, here's all the things that matter to me. Does my life reflect what I've chosen to care about? So that's where I'm playing at the moment. Like, does my life reflect the things that matter to me? And will I find who I am in the midst of that? And that's a very real question for me at the moment that I'm really struggling with. So I don't know how much I can contribute to the answers, but it's huge.
Let me jump in there for a moment with the whole introducing yourself thing, and just say that it's a very Western thing to, when you meet somebody, to say, what do you do? Other cultures don't necessarily respond that way. And one of so for example, our colleagues over the Dutch, New Zealand, they will often mihi or pepeha to one another. And that's a recipe of how you introduce yourself that starts with some geographical attributes like your mountain and your river, and then talks about your people, so your iwi, your tribe, your hapu, and then your family, and then you are at the end of that, and then you introduce yourself at the end. So, I mean, quite apart from anything else, you've just given some of the world's greatest navigators a route to finding your family if you stuff up. They're going to be able to find you. Right? But it actually gives more depth to the person and who you are. So all of us have that. And I think that our Western habit of just thinking of ourselves as our job is something that means that we're not as cognizant of those pieces. And I got asked a question years ago, where you're from, and I said, oh, well, my family's lived here and here and here. And she goes, no. Where are the bones of your ancestors buried? Where are you from? And it's like, oh, that whole concept of being anchored in a place, and that's where you belong. And that's how I found out that I'm an Adelaide girl.
Yeah, right.
Up until then, because I've worked in different places and lived in different places and had thought of myself as sort of a bit more global. Maybe I was just being a bit too Triandra. So I do think that there's a cultural layer to this, to the whole idea of identity.
And do you think that cultural layer is a bit because we are a very individual society here in the West, so it's less about where did you come from and it's more about like what did you make, or what did you create as an individual.
And what have you got?
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. I think that that pepeha recipe is a way of describing family ahead of self, so you can see that that's a very collective culture, and that's the case for a lot of Southeast Asian Pacific families. Will be in that space, and so when you go, hi, I'm a hairdresser, they're like, yeah, but who are you? Because it's not their frame of reference. So that there's some choices there for us about what we can.
Yeah, maybe we need to start doing that. I like that. I love that. And that also makes me think of, I've been watching Ray Martin's documentary on death, and everyone should watch it because we've talked about death before, and it's brilliant. And this is what comes through in that too. The traditions of respecting the dead and being with the dead, and because they are family, they are part of your identity and who you are as well. And that, so again, it's a very cultural difference. Yeah, cultural difference.
I'm also thinking too that as we, if our Western identity is so closely linked to what we do, it's actually quite deductive. Like it's very it's very simplistic and very superficial. So it's no wonder then as those roles strip away, we're kind of like, oh, well, who am I then? Because we haven't been grounded in who are we connected to, where are our lands, where are our family. I mean, I'm also thinking of Indigenous Australians.
Totally.
You meet an Indigenous Australian and they talk about where, literally where they come from and where their ancestors have come from, and you go back 3 or 4 generations and you go, I get you. I get who you are before you've even touched a profession.
I have to I have to jump in. I'm reading the most fantastic book at the moment, and Erica, you'd love it. It's called Behave, and it's by a guy called Robert Zablowski, and he's a neurobiologist. So there's a whole lot of neurobiology that sits behind the reason why we are so concerned about blood relatives. And it has to do with who we can marry and who we can reproduce with. And it's up there in your brain. So it's fascinating stuff. It doesn't mean you can't override it because, you know, there are other forms of family. I have, for example, Auntie Gary in our family. Yep. Auntie Gary's been there forever, is absolutely part of the family. Blood relative, nope, but part of the family. So there's a layer of which we choose our families. Mm-hmm. So there's a whole lot of stuff that can go in there. But I was just fascinated to know that there is a lot of hard coding that's in your brain about some of the choices that you make, because we understand as a species that it's really bad to end up with your first cousin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I give
it makes me think of
royal families.
What you said. Yeah. Alex, your comment earlier about when you were younger, kind of identity being formed or considered more in terms of like what you rejected. Mm-hmm. Did that relate to your family as well? Like, would you look at your family and be like, well, I don't want to be like that, or totally. I don't, you know, maybe that's too personal a question. Kat's just like laughing, but because I think that I see both
impact.
Family, hope you're not listening.
Yeah, I was about to say we've lost about 5 subscribers now.
No, Eric.
You don't have to say it specifically, but I just am curious because I think we do that, right? We're like, I don't want to be that, but I do want to be this.
Yeah,
so I wonder how that ties in with it.
I think we all do that especially with respect to our parents. You know, because they're from a different generation, saw the world differently, were subject to different parenting pressures, and each generation sees those differently. I was no different. I was, however, on top of that, an absolutely hideous teenager. So I'm a teenage runaway. So I got up one morning and decided I hated here and didn't come home for 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah, that was
big.
That. Yeah, I know, right? Look at me now. I'm fine.
What are they?
It's a bit like my mother said to me. My mother said to me once, I drank and smoked all the way through my pregnancy, and look at you, you're perfect. So, yeah, great. Thanks, Mum. You know, could have been the head of Chrysler. Not that was particularly attractive. But I do think there's an awful lot of what's going on in your teenage years that's about socialising you as well. Mm-hmm. So it's about what expectations are and other people's expectations. So for the record, that's what I was running away from. I do think, though, for me, one of my big identity moments, we've gone personal, so let's get into it. Okay, we limber it up, girls. Here we go. So was I married a lovely man, had some beautiful children, and he left one night to go and find himself. And I found out 3 days later he'd gone to find himself with the bank manager down the road. So it's like, you know, but I had this moment then when I was profoundly shocked about who I was. And I realised that a lot of my identity, as I had chosen it at that moment, was tied up in the notion of the relationship with that person. Mm-hmm. So there's a layer, I think, that women in particular are subject to that's all around your success, and who you are as a person is partially defined by your partnerships and your family. Mm-hmm. You know, so I really felt that. And, you know, in typical Alex fashion, about, 48 hours after that, I thought, well, okay, after I picked myself up off the floor, right, okay, what am I going to do about this? And I went off and researched personal mission statements.
Such a business brain.
I know. I wrote myself a mission statement and then started to put together a little bit of a plan. But it was the first, for me, it was really the first workings of trying to figure out who am I without all of these other expectations and without.
And that ties into what we were talking about earlier, where it's tied into the role that you're performing. You were the wife, right?
Yeah.
And the partner.
Yeah.
And the mum, right? Mm-hmm. They're those roles that just get unravelled. And, Brené Brown calls midlife the great unraveling. And it so is. It's like pulling that thread off the woolen jumper,
Well, and I also want to pick up on a word that Alex just mentioned in that I think is really important, but it was so inconspicuous we possibly didn't hear it. you were talking about how, for women, we tie up all of our elements of success into those,
Totally.
into that. And so, well, hang on a second. How are you even defining success? So, what a successful marriage looks like makes me a successful woman, makes me, so now I have a mission statement to make me a successful single woman. Yeah. And again, from that midlife identity perspective, it's like, I don't think those things that I've been pursuing as the measures of success are actually what I'm about or what I want.
And I think that's where your values come back into it, right, Erica? It's like at that moment when I was really bereft and thinking, I don't know what this means, and felt kind of like I was spinning and not anchored to anything. I ended up thinking about, what is my purpose? What am I here to do? And I know that for me, part of what my purpose is to be happy and to bring happiness. That's part of my purpose. And I decided it at that point when I was totally miserable. Isn't that cool?
That's not unlike now, where at this time of life it's kind of like a clean slate, because so many of those relationships are unraveled. I've just yesterday my daughter left to go to Edinburgh to study for a semester. So it's like she's left the nest. My son's no longer at home. It's like it's hubby and I and the dog. So but what does that, all of these relationships that get that evolve, that change, hit us at the very core. But this is where we have to take it back, like you did, Kat and Alex, and go, who am I now, and what's going to get me back up on my feet? And they are those values. They're the flagstones, I think, that we put down to, and we might shift them around and they might change over time. But I think they give us some kind of firmness, footing in all of that wobbly jelly, that is around.
Well, and again, there's another thread coming through around anchor. What's the anchor? What's the firmness? What are your foundations? And I think certainly one of the things that I'm thinking about as I reinvent or recreate or articulate my current identity is, well, those anchors are actually me now. They're not external reference points.
Yes,
totally.
Even though I still am a mother, even though I still am a partner, even though that's all.
They're your roles, darling.
They're roles. That's exactly right. And so actually asking, well, what are the foundations? What are I'm imagining the guard ropes, the anchor ropes. What are the anchor ropes that hold this flagpole up that have nothing to do with my roles?
That's exactly right. I think that's the essence of what we need to ask ourselves and give ourselves the space and time to do it, right? That's the other thing we don't often do, is grant ourselves the space and time to ask ourselves these really deep questions that will set us up for beyond all of that disruptive change.
And know that conversation with yourself could take years. Like, it's not something that you resolve in, it's not going to be finished by this week.
No. And that's another Western myth, isn't it? Okay, by next week I have to know who I am.
That's right.
I have a question for the three of you that I would love to hear. Maybe all of your perspectives, I think, I would really appreciate. But when I'm listening to all of you talk about this, it strikes me that I don't know how you're doing it, but do you think that figuring out this sort of identity, midlife and beyond, is something that you are like excavating for, discovering something that's already there? Or do you think that you are creating it and choosing it, or some combination? Because I feel like they're slightly different things. Combo
for me. Yeah,
say more.
I vote combo. Yeah.
Tell me more.
I'm questioning everything. I'm very much, and I've given myself, I've said to you all, I'm on sabbatical and I'm enjoying not knowing. And I think for me, that's a huge shift in the perception of success, perception of self, is that I'm stepping right back going, I don't know. And that's okay. And then from that I don't know, I'm experimenting with different things. I'm meditating. I'm tuning into Joe Dispenza, who's, talking about quantum, and I'm loving all of that. And then there's all of the researching that I'm doing for my newsletters. So I'm like this giant sponge at the moment, and I'm exploring things with great curiosity and a fervor for wanting to know shit that I don't know. And then seeing how I respond to that to form what the values are. And curiosity is obviously a value, right? But and how that changes me. And the other thing that's interesting, so hold that and we can continue on with that. But before I forget, because it is a midlife brain at times, is what does that do to those around us?
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm very fortunate that I have a husband who goes, "That's lovely, darling." And we talk about that and he gives me the grace and space to continue to explore. But I can imagine that in some situations, people put up this brick wall and go, "Who the fuck are you?" And I don't know that this is going to work anymore. And often in midlife, in this stage, once the kids have left home, women often walk away from marriages. It's the women who do that too, by the way, statistically, because of all of the unraveling, the changes, the shifts. But I think it's also bubbling up. This is me. This is what I want. And I don't know that that's going to work for me anymore. So there's a lot in that. I know there's probably 3 big points, but does that answer your question, Erica?
Yeah, it is. It's huge. I like how you answered that. I think it's like it's the not knowing piece, right? It's the comfort with the discomfort of lack of certainty.
The ambiguity.
And maybe you're always discovering. I think that was something that I had already had the thought of before all of, my life sort of shifted a lot. There was this notion of, as soon as I turned 40, kind of this feeling that like I was discovering, and that would always be the case, that maybe growing up and growing old is this process of constant discovery. And that excites me, like to think that maybe there's just a new version of me to meet, maybe every day, like maybe I learn something every day. And I think that's really cool. But I appreciate too that there's a level of choice in that, of sort of saying, well, it's not all just left to chance. Maybe I get to choose based on my values. Yeah. What about you, Alex?
I'm pretty clear about my values. My values are open, honest, fair, and compassionate. And I got to that not in the first week, but in the second. No, just kidding. It took a while. So for me, it was a process of crafting lists of words and sitting with it for a while, and then asking myself what was constantly turning up, like what was consistent in situations for me. And it did take a while, as you suggested. Can take years. But open, honest, fair, compassionate have been my core values for a long time. Delinquency would probably be the next one. Just kidding.
Do you feel like you discovered those in terms of you uncovered what was there, or do you feel like you chose them, or do you think that it was like a bit of a combo, like Anita said?
I think that the essence of you as a person, I think, is set by the time that you're about 7 or 8 years old. And there's a lot of really lovely evidence for that. And so I don't feel like I was necessarily choosing it, as in I shall have this sweet and not this one. It wasn't quite like that. It was more like it's been there the whole time and now I'm just recognising it in a different way. Yeah, so and then just making a conscious decision, going, right, okay, fairness, really, really important to me. Being open, very, very important to me. Honesty, compassionate, very important. So I, that's why I can rattle it off, because I've gone through and done the exercise and put the time in. I do think, though, there's an awful lot. Who gets given the time to do this? It's like when you're a really busy woman and you're the one that's holding everything together, as is so often the case, the whole idea that you might, write yourself your personal mission statement. Sorry, I know how geeky that sounds. I apologise, but
don't apologise.
I did mine years ago too. No, I'm not.
For God's sake.
I've got mine as well. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So
I've done it too, Alex.
Yeah, good. Thanks.
Oh, now I feel bad. I'm going to go home and write mine.
I can point you to some good websites and shit. But to me, it's like it's almost like there had to be a reason. And husband number one going off to find himself was my reason to actually sit down and do that stuff. Yeah. Because I was like, I now feel like I'm floating. And
do you think it's part of a grieving process?
No, because I've done grieving, and I didn't need to do it when I was really grieving. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was loss, definitely loss there, but disclosure for the folks at home, I'm a bereaved parent, so my son died of cancer just before his 5th birthday. One of my sons, I have another one. They were twins, and And so I've gone through that, and that is a completely different experience for me.
Okay.
But everyone experiences that really differently too. So it's like this is one of the things I think that is difficult about, well, not difficult, but challenging about sharing a lot of experiences, is that we can have very similar experiences. You know, about 14 months after my son died, I had a call from a girlfriend of mine who said, I'm driving up to Sydney. My son's on a helicopter. We're going to the hospital. He's just been diagnosed with a brain tumour. And then I was a cancer coach for her. And despite the fact that I had known her for many, many, many years, she dealt with the situation really differently to me. And so it was just a really poignant reminder that while we think that the rest of the world thinks like us, they don't. They really don't. We're all really very unique in that way. And that's both wonderful and frustrating and terrifying and all those wonderful things.
Well, that's also part of identity, right?
Yeah, totally.
That's literally, it's like how you identify will contribute heavily to how you deal with those massive life moments.
Yeah, and I think that some of those life moments then become things that become part of your identity. So while I can say my values are this,
the experiences,
part of my identity is also the experiences that I've had. So it's the teenage runaway, it's the bereaved parent, it's a whole lot of other stuff. And they kind of, I feel like they're like the circles of bark on a tree. They kind of come to you and become part of who you are. You know, yeah. And that's pretty cool.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
And that's what makes us so beautifully unique.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Wow. How about you, Kat?
I think I'm excavating. And part of that is because I've been fortunate enough to be in those spaces where I might be encouraged to write a mission statement since I was 16. Like so right
That's
when
cool.
when we're having those formative teenage years, I've been present to creating what I want. And particularly over the last 2 years, if not the last 10, I've seen myself revert back to the teenage girl that I was just now in an adult body going, oh man, if I'd just stuck with me, like if I'd just stuck with all the shit that I knew to be true then, I wouldn't have made some really big life fuck-ups because I wouldn't have been trying to be somebody else. Right. I would have actually been me. So for me, I think it's an excavation. Having said that, though, part of how I do that excavation is by exploring and looking at other people or other information or other gurus and seeing if it resonates. And so I'm letting different sources bounce off me relatively quickly and going, do I get it? No. Yes. Oh, well, not sure. Let me but I'm pretty sure it's a excavation for me. It's coming back to who I am. And it's interesting, Erica, reflecting on your current explorations. No, I can't say that. My identity does not come from how I was, I feel like my identity is so very different to my familial identity or from what I was raised, and that was very true for me even from a teenager. So I've always felt like the black sheep in my family, not from the runaway perspective, just from no, I don't get what you're about. I don't get these values. And so I could get very meta and very metaphysical. I don't know where all that comes from, other than to just go, yeah, that's me.
It's within you.
It is within me. Yeah, that's it.
I think we see that as parents too, don't we? Like I've got 2 boys and they're both the product of me and my husband, and they're very similar in some ways and incredibly different in others. And they were born that way, you know, like it's so interesting to think that we are born with a temperament that you see as a parent very clearly. And then you grow up with rules and expectations and responsibilities and stories about who you have to be to fit in and be accepted and be liked and be successful. It's interesting what you said, Kat, about, like looking back at your teenage self. I found myself doing that a lot lately and kind of seeing what I look like, what I was choosing to wear, and kind of almost even remembering the narrative in my head of like, you don't fit in if you wear that. Pick something different. And really seeing that there's big hints about who I am when I look back at that version of myself.
Yep.
And I wonder what regret, or maybe that's too heavy to get into, but I hear almost a tinge of regret when you talked about that, of like almost those sliding door moments that we could imagine, had I not given myself away in this way or chosen something that didn't feel authentic to me at the time, what might life have looked like? What might I have experienced? It's an interesting question, and I think a little bit of a rabbit hole.
Yes, a very deep rabbit hole that has no end.
We're going to be here a while.
Alex talked about her articulated values. I probably haven't got that same list. Having said that, though, one of the things that I do value strongly is not regretting the past.
Yeah, good for you.
Because it is part of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Even those decisions that I look back on and go, whoa, really, girlfriend? Really? Really? They're part of who I am, and they're part of what I now know and how I can then show up in the world. What is interesting is to see, for me, in that distinction in the teenage years of knowing who I was, being quite willing to be who I was, and then somewhere along the line that societal conditioning kicked in that said, no, that wasn't okay. And so I then subscribed to what the world was telling me I should be doing next, or what the world was telling me I needed to do in order to be okay. I remember, for example, as a teenager, I was the only one in my friendship circle who didn't have a boyfriend. I was the only one. And so I was so desperate for someone to just love me, just someone to hold my hand. And so then years later, when I was 24, when someone finally did kind of go, yeah, you're all right, I was like,
will you go round with me?
Will you go round with me? And it was kind of that childish. Yeah. It really was that childish. And then not only that, then he said, would you marry me? And I'm like, of course, because that's just what I want.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's really interesting to see how that has played out and how that's come back in my life.
It makes me think of the distinction between our stories and our identity and how they interplay. Mm-hmm. I feel like, oh gosh, we never can stay on a shallow level, can we? I just think it's such an interesting distinction. You have stories and your identity is kind of woven in there, but I don't think they're the same thing either, which is interesting. Anita, you look like you've got I can see you champing at the bit.
No, I'm listening really intently. No, I love all that. I think that's exactly it. Something that is firing off in my brain as we're talking about our teenage years. It's interesting. I wonder if we have the same opportunity or recognize it as an opportunity from a societal point of view, that we expect our pubescent kids, our teenage kids, to do dumb things, right? Young and dumb, as they explore, as they find themselves and establish their identity. Do we give the same rope and expectation or to women and men in midlife?
No, of course we don't. We call it a midlife crisis.
We roll a crisis.
We roll our eyes when the men
How
go and
fucked
buy
is that?
Totes.
Seriously.
Totes.
Well, it is, but it's also, you are an adult.
You should know better by now.
No, but I do think that there's, if you think about what's going on physiologically for you when you're a teenager, you're not yet fully formed.
Yeah.
You actually don't have some of the capacity of your brain that grows afterwards that helps you with things like mother of sons, impulse control, right? So as an adult, of course, you would see it differently and make different decisions about stuff, but that's okay.
Yeah, but I guess it's the other end of the spectrum where it's a falling away now. That's what I'm saying. So maybe when we're younger, it's the building up and it's the fusing and coming together. But this time of life, I think it's the other thing. It's the falling away to reveal, and to start again. I really do believe we need to give ourselves permission to appreciate that this is a time of deep learning for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think I think probably the distinction, to pick up on Alex's point, the distinction when we're teenagers is that there is a not knowing of the consequences. You know, when the teenage boys do stupid things and you go, what were you thinking? They kind of go, I wasn't really. Yeah. Whereas
nothing going on. Zip, nada.
But that's not going on now. Like as a middle-aged woman, that's not that's harder to justify, because I do know, like I'm kind of going, I know that I'm doing some reckless things, or I know I'm trying some new things. And some compassion, some grace, and some empathy. Some empathy would be lovely around, okay, you're going through a different phase of life. And so, for example, whenever somebody tells me that their marriage has just split up, my first question is no longer, I'm so sorry to hear that. My first question is, how are you? Because sometimes it's a celebration. Sometimes
totally.
It's far out, thank goodness.
Yeah, totally.
Can I just ask a question? Are you hearing us all? Is everybody hearing each other?
Yeah.
No, I'm not.
I'm not hearing you.
Hearing you through the...
No. So, but you're hearing us, Erica?
Yep, I can hear
Alex,
everyone.
you're hearing us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Except
that's
now
good.
I can't hear Erica.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll try not to say too much then.
No, I think it's
anyone
our
hear me?
little.
Yes, I can hear you.
Maybe that's the universe saying wrap it
Alex
up.
can hear me.
We might need Dan back.
Yeah, I don't know. As long as it's all still coming through, and I guess we won't know until.
Well, if Erica,
I think if I can hear you, surely it's being captured in the
okay.
computer.
All right, we'll keep ploughing on then. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, is there much more to say?
I want to come back to the stories piece.
Stories, okay.
Because Erica, I think you've hit onto something that I've been exploring a lot in my work. When I work with people, largely women, who are trying to articulate who they are in the world, and it's like basically because I'm teaching them how to do an elevator pitch. What has blown my mind in the last 4 years has been how the stories they tell about themselves to other people completely changes how they see themselves. And I keep sitting back and going, oh my freaking goodness, what is this about? And I'm not a psychologist. But I'm a studier of human beings. So I'll take that. What I've observed is we change our identity by changing the stories we tell about ourselves, because the stories we tell about ourselves to other people then gets reflected back to us. And so how people respond to us affects how we perceive ourselves. And so it becomes this really interesting loop. So, and as an example, if I walk into a room, I walk into Alex's room and I'm just kind of like, oh, I just do this stuff and I'm pretty shy and nobody really pays any attention to me and I just kind of do my thing, then that's what the people around me will reflect back. They're not going to change that story. They'll reflect that back. Whereas if I walk in and go, I'm the CEO of my own small business. I've been doing this for the last 10 years. I work with these kind of clients and these kind of clients and these kind of clients, and there's a different piece.
Different energy and vibe.
Totally. And so part of what happens, I think, for women as we've collected our life experiences is that they're very disparate. From a professional perspective, not many of us are still doing what it is that we left school to do. And so we feel like we're faking it. We feel like we're literally imposters because, well, I'm not qualified to be doing this. I've ended up here accidentally. This was a series of random mistakes that have ended up here. And when we tell ourselves that story, then we don't have that anchor. We don't have that foundation. We sit in this sense of, I'm a fraud. I'm making it up. I hope nobody finds out that I actually have no right to be here and I've just been faking it for long enough that people blah, blah, blah. So I'm still exploring that, but I think there is a massive piece around the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that we tell others and how that then informs and changes our identity.
Definitely. Your brain can't tell the difference between a story that someone else tells you and the story that you're telling yourself.
Yeah.
So if you're a low down dirty dog, then you're a low down dirty dog. So
there's and every story reinterpretation. That's the thing that's so fascinating, right? And within the therapy world, we do this, we kind of reframe these stories to be able to kind of heal the little girl or whatever that was impacted by the thing that happened. So it's not unreasonable, because when you think about the fact that really everybody's experiences are an interpretation of an event that happened that really nobody can have an objective perspective over, right? It is interesting to think that we can, and it comes back to that excavation or choice, doesn't it? It's a bit of a, you're right, there's no end to this little rabbit hole. I appreciate you coming down it with me, though. I really appreciate that perspective. I think that's a really interesting way to look at identity for sure.
I don't know whether, Erica, you might be too young, but Alex and Anita will remember Hey Hey It's Saturday back in its heyday.
I remember that.
Okay, in its heyday, not in its remake. And there was one of the skits used to be Celebrity Head, where each of the contestants would be given a celebrity's name to put on their head, and they had 10 questions to ask. Well, there have been some scientific or psychological studies done where people are given roles on their heads. They're not told what the role is, and then they're put in different social environments to interact. And one of the really interesting things about these experiments is people will start acting like the role on their head, even though they don't know the role on their head.
What?
It's in direct response to how they're being interacted with. So, you can have hooker, you can have lawyer, you can have doctor. I know. And so I sit there and I think of that, and I think of the stories that we then tell ourselves, and how the stories that when we how people react to us based on the stories that we've told.
Oof.
Yeah, exactly. Oof.
Well, because it makes me think of what the cause and effect is there too. Because
correct.
There's a lot of that oofing going on, girls.
I might be stuck in a rabbit hole for the rest of the day. Someone rescue me.
Well, okay, so a rescue for the rabbit hole is whatever you're ruminating on right now, is it going to contribute to or detract from your happiness?
That's it.
And if it doesn't contribute something, does not spark joy, push it away, move on.
Change the story.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
Walk outside, go and do something. Like, just change up the energy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Couldn't
and
agree more.
it's a real discipline to do it, because occasionally, we like to kind of go, oh my God, but I'm really drowning here, or we need to suffer a little bit.
Is it a tragedy?
I do.
We were talking about that.
Yeah.
I do like giving myself a time limit. All right,
nice.
I'm gonna ruminate on this for the next 20 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have my bad feeling fixed, and then I'm gonna move on.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
You set a timer?
Sometimes.
Nice.
Particularly if I can feel that it's going to go really hard, I'll go, okay, you've got 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And then go have some chocolate.
And that's
go
compassion
have a walk.
too.
Sorry?
There's compassion in that. There's compassion in that. There's compassion in being able to say, I am suffering. That is compassion, right? Compassion is a recognition of our suffering, and realizing that we're still worthy of love and kindness in the midst of that. So I think sometimes that capacity to say, well, this is fucking hard, is really important. But you're right, you can't live there, because then that becomes your story, right? And so it's like, well, yeah, oof, again, it's big. It's a big question, and it makes you realize, I think, why this almost kind of comical sketch of the midlife crisis is such a thing, because it can feel like a crisis of sorts, and we don't see this done well, I don't think.
Yep. Well, and society has actually made a comedy sketch out of it, rather than giving us the space and the compassion to be present to it. It's actually,
and we need to reframe that. We need to say that this is a time where you need to give yourself the grace and the space, and to question it, and it's an opportunity rather than a.
Well, yeah, and it's normal. It's not something that needs to be fixed or masked or managed out. It's like no. This is quite literally your body doing its thing.
Exactly.
Do what you need to do to make it manageable, but don't ignore it. Don't suppress it. Don't run away from it.
And if it's happening to you, you're not a freak.
No, you're a woman. Happens to every single one of us.
Yeah. Alex, you got something bubbling away there?
I do have some stuff bubbling. I was thinking about about this whole midlife and the identity thing this morning, while thinking about, hopefully I'll say something mildly intelligent when I'm being on the podcast. And one of the things that was interesting that I came up with was we educate children at school around sexual reproduction, but there's nothing about menopause.
No.
There's nothing about midlife.
No.
And so I think that contributes to the overall shock factor.
Yeah.
Or the what the fuck factor that happens as we're starting to go through all of this. I also want to point out that if somebody's doing midlife crisis well, they might not look like they're in crisis.
Oh,
good point.
Oh God, that's a whole other podcast, girls. Seriously.
Probably is.
But I think it's a great sort of segue, Anita, into sort of kind of like pointing out why we're doing this. You know, Alex has just said, like, it's people don't talk about this. We don't get lessons on this. We don't get the handbook. And so it can feel like you're screwing it up or doing it wrong or not doing it like everybody else. And so it's kind of just so, I don't know, comforting, I guess, to hear that this is just a part of it, right? And everybody else is going through it too. So, you know, just a reminder to our listeners, like, this is why we're having this conversation. This is why, you know, we're inviting people who are willing to be vulnerable with us and sharing parts of our story that perhaps, you know, don't always feel comfortable, but is important for other people to hear, to start that sort of trickle effect of conversation and awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that point, I've been thinking, what do we want to leave our listeners with? You know, what's the big aha takeaways from this? I think for me, one of the ones is give yourself the space and time and question. Like, it's a fantastic opportunity to do that as the layers, as the relationships shift and you feel the layers moving and falling and things changing beneath your feet and all around you. Use it as a time to question what really matters most to you as those flagstones for trying to get up and go again.
Can I make a suggestion for like a final question for all of us or all of you?
Go for it.
I just had a little spark of inspiration. Okay, so our listeners are going to go and make that time and space. I trust that that's going to happen. So if they were going to sit with a journal or
like the little
something
notebook
like that, or a little notebook, like that little notebook that we have that they can download, great opportunity. Go to the show notes, go download that thing. What question would you contribute to that journaling session to help them get closer to a sense of this is who I am, or this is who I'm becoming, or this is who I want to be? And I realize this is throwing you in the deep end because I gave you no preparation, but I'm so confident that you're up for it. Alex is like, really? Yes, I'm so confident.
I've got to confess to you then, Erica, that I'm not sure that I'm terribly good at gratitude journaling.
Doesn't have to be a gratitude.
No, it's not a gratitude. It's a question.
No,
what's the
a question
I'm just thinking about the journaling. But look, a question.
You're focusing on the wrong bloody thing, women.
Oh,
Yeah, no fucking, there doesn't have to be any fucking gratitude.
So maybe I'll just throw this bit in. I think for me, when I'm thinking about the identity piece, the single biggest difference between the first half of my life and what I hope will be the second half, she says optimistically, is that is my appreciation for the beauty in flawed human beings.
Yeah.
The first half of your life is all about that. It is all about be like this, this standard, that standard, what everyone else thinks. And then you get some serious shit go down in your life. And if you're really lucky, it happens a lot. And then you grow from that. You don't remember the happy stuff. You remember the miserable stuff. And you come out of that with more. There's a richness and a depth there that is different. And to me, that's been a bigger contributor to identity than, the personal mission statement in a way. It's just understanding that. And I think that's what happens when the estrogen goes. It's like, fuck, there's a lot of really beautiful people around, because it's at that point that you don't care about the Paris Hiltons of the world and what that all looks like, because that's just complete bollocks, and it doesn't last anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the really interesting, flawed, difficult, complex, stuff that's hard. That is just so joyful there. Good luck turning that into a question.
Thanks, Alex.
You're welcome.
You're funny.
It's like a reflection on the challenges and what
or maybe a challenge just to this
choose one challenge.
The idea that you just have to be perfect at stuff for it to be successful, or stuff that bollocks.
Stuff that bollocks, indeed. I think because I am a journaler, and as part of my morning meditation, actually every morning, one of the questions that I ask myself is, who am I? And then a follow-up. Well, actually, I have a series of questions. I'm very happy to share them. They came from David G. So I'm not going to take credit, but who am I? What am I grateful for? Do I agree that I cannot step back into the past and change it? Do I agree and accept that I cannot step forward into the future and control it? Mm-hmm. I say yes every morning. Mm-hmm. Watch me try. Watch me try.
I'm going to control the crap out of today.
And then what is my heart's desire? And so those questions for me keep me quite present. And to answer your question, Erica, about what would be the journal prompt, it would be, who am I without using any of my titles?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Yeah.
Who am I without
the roles
referencing, who I am in relation to other people? Now, I got to say, I would draw a complete blank on that question right now.
And that's okay.
Totally. But it's and even if I probably still did lean on the reference to the roles, asking that deeper question of who am I if I couldn't use my roles helps to go, actually I'm this consistently across the board. This is who I am. This is how I show up in all contexts of my life. So that must be part of who I am.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that, I think a question could very well be, write your own eulogy, like that, who are you at 90, or people are at your 90th birthday party. That's the question. What are they saying about you? Because what they're saying about you is the essence of who you are, not necessarily, and definitely won't be a roles-focused thing. So I'd kind of lean into that a bit, I think.
I've got a question. I figured one out. What does contentedness feel like?
Is that contentedness with a New Zealand accent? Contentedness?
Did I
it sounded like contentedness, and I was like, well, where did that come from?
Like Kiwi? No, I'm South Australian.
Oh, darling.
Yeah, I know. So I round
contented.
my
No, I
vowels.
just wanted to check. Please leave that in. Alex and I know each other well enough that I can.
Yeah.
I'm not editing that
flashing
out.
to me. What does contentedness feel like? Yeah, because trying to understand that helps you to build a picture of what it is and helps you to move towards it, I think.
Which is different to happiness.
Totally.
Which
very much so. And joy.
Well, happiness is that external jolt, with all the external stuff, which I think is more aligned with roles in some ways.
Well, and it's also heightened. Like contentedness is, did I go to sleep tonight feeling good about myself? Whereas happiness is what made me, like, it's completely different.
So it's like there's a lack of urgency.
Yes.
There's no meanness to it.
Oh.
I know. Yeah. How I have suffered.
And it reminds me of the quote that I often say to myself is, when is enough plenty?
Oh, God.
Oh.
And that's, to me, that's contentedness. It goes to the heart of that, is when is enough plenty?
I like that.
The other thing that I want to just throw in here, because we've clearly gone past the end of your session. Here, any sort of sensible
Good luck with the
limit.
editing, Erica.
Yeah.
We're just going to let it roll.
It's a big one.
Only that one of the things that I want to recognise and acknowledge is that for a lot of women, they won't get the opportunity to do what we're talking about.
Correct.
We sit here in a place of privilege.
We do.
And we can sit here and think about this stuff and to take that moment, and not everyone can do that. So for the women who might be listening and are not in that situation, I'm sending lots of love to you and hope that you can craft a little space and start. And, see you down the road.
Yeah.
I see.
What?
That just sparks something, because I also do think that part of identity is also acknowledging that your desired identity or your desired roles might not be possible to be realised. Again, from that place of privilege, it's all good and well to say, well, I don't want this marriage, this role, this job anymore. There is also a part of identity that goes, I think, this isn't what I want, and it's what I'm going to choose for now because that's what I need to do for whatever reason. And that doesn't make that identity piece any less important. It's just recognising I'm compromising right now.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Compromising, or it might be the thing that actually navigates you through not the less than ideal situation.
Yeah, correct.
Your values will, your identity. And it might be the values more than the whole identity piece, but it might just be those values that you treasure that are inherently you that will navigate you through that difficult time. Yeah. And if the questions are coming up for you too, which I think it happens a lot in midlife, I granted a lot, this is from a position of privilege, but I think with most people, I'd be surprised if there wasn't some questioning coming up in this time of disruption, that it's okay if the questions are coming up.
Yeah, totally.
That's perfectly okay, and you're allowed to explore it when you
normal.
can. Yeah, it's normal. Yeah.
We don't know it's normal because we've never learned about it, because we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
But in that, and going back to that teenage analogy before, regardless of what we do with it, it is a fundamental shift in hormones. Like it is a biochemical reaction that's going on in your body, just the same way that teenagehood was. So you're not a freak for having the questions or for having the anger or for having the whoa. What do you mean? What do you mean?
And who am I? What was that? Was that me? Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. Love
Might
it.
be a place to leave off. What do you think, Erica?
I think so. I'm really so grateful again, Alex and Kat, for you coming in to share yourselves with us, because it is, something we definitely don't take for granted. The time, the vulnerability, the wisdom. So thank you for joining us again. And hopefully it won't be the last time. Just put that out there. There's going to be
there's a hat trick.
3.
I was going to say maybe there's a hat trick for season 3.
Yeah.
Guaranteed.
Alex and Cat, the sequel. Sons
sort of
of Alex and Cat.
It's a frequent mini-series. Just like meatballs through a straw, so are the days of our lives.
Oh, we love you. You love you. Thanks so much. That's it.
And a reminder to, download the workbook if you haven't done that already, show notes for that, and make sure you're subscribed wherever it is that you're listening.
Yeah, and if you're loving these two, we'll also, lead you to where you can find out more about, if you're curious about them, I would be very curious about them. There's links below us to, you can find what they do.
Yes, and I'll link to last.
Yeah.
I'll link to our previous episode with them too. So if you missed the joy that was, the Making Space episode in season 1, I will link to that in the show notes too. But thank you, all 3 of you over there in your cozy box. We'll see you soon.
Great to see you, Erica.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for Midlife Unfiltered. If you loved this episode, you're going to love what's coming next. Be sure you're subscribed on your platform of choice so you don't miss a thing.
We'd also be delighted, and for sure do a little happy dance, if you took the time to leave us a rating and review. Those not only absolutely make our day, but more importantly, it helps other women who may be wanting something more from their midlife to know about us and to listen in as well. You can connect with us on socials too. You'll find links to connect on LinkedIn, Instagram, and email in the show notes.